The chamber froze. For a heartbeat, the air itself seemed to stop moving, caught between the echo of Jasmine Crockett's final words and the stunned silence that followed. Jim Jordan's expression hardened, his jaw tightening, but the room no longer belonged to him. It belonged to her. A murmur rippled through the audience, half disbelief, half awe, until it erupted into scattered claps that broke protocol, yet carried the weight of raw respect. From the back row, a staffer stifled a smirk. A journalist's pen stalled mid-scribble. Even seasoned lawmakers leaned back in their chairs, their eyes darting between Jordan's flushed face and Crockett's steady calm. She didn't gloat. She didn't grin. She simply sat, composed, her logic still hanging in the air like a verdict that needed no judge. And in that moment, every immigrant family watching, every young woman told to wait her turn, every voter who had been drowned out by arrogance felt a jolt of pride. No one expected her to stand up to Jim Jordan this way. But what happened next shook the entire chamber, and the way she dismantled him, piece by piece, is something no one will ever forget. The hearing had been tense from the very start. Cameras lined the back walls, their red lights glowing like unblinking eyes, ready to capture every raised eyebrow, every stumble, every carefully crafted soundbite. It was the kind of stage Jim Jordan thrived on. He wasn't just a congressman here. He was a showman. For years, his voice had been the loudest in the room, battering opponents with interruptions, rapid-fire accusations, and a tone that left little room for reasoned reply. Most folded under the barrage. Others tried to fight back, and only ended up looking rattled. Jordan's reputation as the bully of the chamber wasn't whispered. It was worn like armor. But on this day, the dynamic shifted. Sitting across from him was someone he underestimated, Jasmine Crockett. Her calm demeanor was deceptive, masking the sharpness of her preparation and the clarity of her convictions. Unlike many who had sparred with Jordan before, she wasn't there to survive his assault. She was there to turn it against him. To the casual observer, she appeared unshaken by his booming presence. To those paying closer attention, there was an energy building, an unspoken challenge that his tactics were about to meet their match. Why did it matter? Because this wasn't just political theater. It was about who gets to control the narrative of truth in a democracy already strained by division. Every immigrant watching, every young activist searching for proof that dignity can prevail over noise, found a stake in what was unfolding. Jordan's usual domination wasn't guaranteed anymore. But little did the audience know, a storm was brewing, one that would flip the script, expose arrogance, and ignite a moment that no headline writer could ignore. Jim Jordan didn't build his reputation on quiet persuasion. He built it on sheer force of volume, on the relentless rhythm of cross-examination that often felt less like inquiry and more like interrogation. For years, he had perfected a brand of politics that thrived on disruption, talking over opponents, cutting off answers, and flooding the air with accusations so fast that clarity rarely had the chance to breathe. To his allies, he was the gladiator of the chamber, the man unafraid to throw punches in a room where civility was supposed to hold sway. To his critics, he was the embodiment of Washington's arrogance, loud, combative, and dismissive of anything that didn't align with his script. His confidence was legendary, his posture unmistakable. He leaned forward in hearings like a predator, never bothering with a suit jacket, as if to telegraph that he was there for a fight, not decorum. A veteran of countless clashes, he relished the spectacle, often reducing seasoned colleagues to flustered defensiveness. In his world, control was measured not by truth, but by dominance. Yet beneath the swagger lay contradictions that chipped at his authority. He styled himself as a defender of accountability, yet questions about his own oversight during earlier controversies shadowed him. He railed against government overreach, but wielded his committee gavel like a weapon to silence dissent. He spoke of protecting the people, while too often mocking the voices of those who didn't fit his vision of America. The gap between his rhetoric and reality grew wider each year, but his confidence never wavered, because in that chamber, confidence often counted more than coherence. Jordan walked into the hearing that day certain he would dictate the script once again. He had done it countless times before. To him, this was another performance, another opportunity to remind the cameras who held the power. What he didn't see, what he couldn't imagine, was that his playbook was about to fail. Because on this day, his trademark swagger would meet an unexpected wall. Jasmine Crockett didn't arrive in Congress by accident, nor by inheritance, nor by riding the coattails of some larger political machine. She carved her path with grit sharpened in the courtroom, where she built a reputation as a fearless attorney defending the marginalized, the overlooked, and the silenced. Long before the cameras found her, she was in cramped offices with stacks of case files, fighting uphill battles for clients who couldn't afford to lose. She learned quickly that justice was rarely handed out freely. It had to be demanded, argued, and secured with relentless logic. Her story was not one of privilege, but of perseverance. As a black woman stepping into spaces long dominated by men who looked nothing like her, she was no stranger to skepticism. She had been underestimated in law school classrooms, spoken over in hearings, doubted in negotiations. Each slight, each dismissal, became fuel. Each time someone assumed she wasn't prepared, she proved she was sharper, faster, more disciplined than anyone had anticipated. She carried those scars with pride, not as wounds, but as reminders that her resilience was earned. In the halls of Congress, she brought that same resolve. Unlike Jordan's volume-driven theatrics, Crockett's weapon was precision. Her calm presence was disarming, her measured tone deliberate. Where he swung wildly, she struck surgically. And when he relied on bluster, she relied on facts that could not be shouted down. Her background as an attorney gave her an instinct for cross-examination, but with a twist. She wasn't just dismantling arguments, she was exposing contradictions with a surgeon's patience. To many watching, she represented something larger than herself. She was the voice of daughters told they were too emotional, the face of professionals forced to work twice as hard for half the credit, the embodiment of immigrant families who saw in her the promise that America could still reward determination. She stood as proof that dignity and intellect could triumph over arrogance and noise. Her life had trained her for this moment. Every trial, every uphill fight, every moment she was overlooked or dismissed had sharpened her blade of logic. Now, seated across from one of Congress's loudest and most combative voices, she didn't flinch. She didn't shrink. She simply prepared to do what she had always done. Let the truth cut through the chaos. And when Jordan tried his usual tactics, Crockett's preparation would turn the tables. The exchange began with Jordan doing what he always did, cutting in before Crockett could finish a sentence. His voice thundered across the chamber, not in pursuit of clarity, but in pursuit of control. He threw out claims rapid fire, peppering them with the kind of half-truths and distortions that left many opponents scrambling. The rhythm was familiar. Raise the volume, press the point, drown out the reply. It was a performance honed over years, and the cameras caught every moment. But this time, something was different. Crockett didn't lunge into the fray or try to shout over him. Instead, she let him run. She sat with steady posture, eyes fixed on him, her silence unnerving. As Jordan's voice grew louder, the audience began to murmur. Some leaned forward, expecting the usual spectacle of interruption and chaos. Others exchanged glances, sensing a shift in the air. Jordan pressed harder, his words tumbling over each other as he tried to frame her as unprepared, as incapable of countering his authority. Yet every time he cut her off, she waited. Every time he raised his voice, she held hers steady. It was not the reaction he wanted. It was the reaction he feared. Because in her composure lay a trap. While he burned through his arsenal of interruptions, she was gathering, listening, preparing. The very silence he mistook for weakness was her strength. And slowly, the room began to notice. The murmurs grew. A staffer shook their head in disbelief. The tension was no longer about Jordan's performance. It was about the moment everyone felt approaching, but couldn't yet see. Everyone braced for another Jordan bulldoze, but this time, the script flipped. At last, when Jordan's barrage paused long enough for oxygen to re-enter the room, Jasmine Crockett leaned forward. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't match his fury. Instead, she began with the simplest of weapons, a calm, measured tone that carried further than his shouting ever could. "Congressman," she said, her voice steady, "you've raised 3 different points. Let's take them one at a time." The chamber shifted. People straightened in their seats. It was the kind of line only an attorney trained to dissect chaos could deliver. And then she began. First, she addressed his distortion of facts, laying out dates and documented evidence with surgical precision. She didn't flood the air with noise. She dropped each fact like a stone into still water, letting the ripples speak for themselves. Jordan tried to interject, but each time she paused, turned toward him with calm eyes, and said, "I'll finish. Then you can respond." The audience murmured. It was a reversal of power. He was no longer dictating the rhythm. She was. Second, she dismantled his logic. Where he tried to conflate unrelated issues, she untangled them with sharp clarity. "What you're suggesting," she explained, "isn't just misleading. It's impossible under the law you claim to defend." She let the words hang in the air. A staffer in the back audibly whispered, "Wow." Finally, she turned to his behavior itself. With deliberate restraint, she reframed his interruptions as proof of weakness, not dominance. "When the facts are on your side, you don't need to shout," she said evenly, her gaze unwavering. "But when they're not, well, volume becomes the only defense." That line hit like a hammer. A pause followed, so complete it felt orchestrated. For the first time, Jordan shifted uncomfortably, his usual smirk faltering. The audience reaction was instant. Muffled gasps, scattered claps, a wave of approving nods spreading across the chamber. Even colleagues on the sidelines who rarely showed emotion leaned forward, unable to hide their recognition of the moment. Crockett closed with her sharpest blade, the punchline sharpened by truth itself. "So, if we're here for accountability, let's have it. For all of us. But accountability begins with honesty, not theater." Silence. Not the awkward silence of confusion, but the heavy silence of realization. Jordan stared back, his arsenal depleted, his presence diminished. She didn't need to gloat. The logic was enough. The chamber had just witnessed something rare. Arrogance unraveled by clarity, noise defeated by reason. And as Crockett leaned back in her chair, composed and unshaken, it was clear the balance of power had shifted. But the real shock came after, when the audience response changed everything. The chamber could no longer contain itself. First came the gasps, small, sharp intakes of breath that betrayed disbelief. Then came the clapping, hesitant at first, but quickly gaining force as staffers, spectators, even rival lawmakers broke protocol with a ripple of applause. Nods traveled across the room like a current. A few smirks surfaced, not from allies of Crockett, but from colleagues who had long endured Jordan's interruptions, and now found a quiet satisfaction in watching him stumble. Respect wasn't just given, it was claimed in that moment. Within minutes, the moment leapt beyond the walls of the hearing room. Clips hit social media, bouncing from one platform to another with viral speed. Hashtags emerged organically. #Crockett Logic, #Truth Over Noise, #Jordan Silenced. By nightfall, the clip had been viewed millions of times, reshared by grassroots activists, student leaders, and immigrant families who saw in Crockett's calm takedown a validation of their own struggles to be heard. Memes flooded timelines. One showed Jordan yelling into a void, while Crockett calmly held up a mirror labeled "Facts." Another captioned her line, "When the facts are on your side, you don't need to shout," against a backdrop of cheering crowds. Late-night commentators played the clip on loop, dissecting not just her logic, but her poise. Celebrities weighed in, praising her clarity as a model of what political leadership should look like. And Jordan? He became the punchline. Comment threads mocked his red face, his failed interruptions, his uncharacteristic silence after her counterattack. The man once feared for his bulldozing presence was suddenly cast as a relic of noise politics, undone by someone he thought he could easily overpower. Meanwhile, Crockett's profile soared. Commentators began calling her the rising star of the chamber, the fresh voice who embodied both strength and dignity. Young women across the country clipped her words for TikTok audios. Community leaders in immigrant neighborhoods replayed the moment as proof that representation matters, that truth can still outshine arrogance. The takedown was no longer a single debate. It was a cultural ripple echoing far beyond Washington. And yet, what Crockett did next proved this wasn't just about one moment. In the days that followed, Jasmine Crockett didn't bask in the glow of viral fame. She chose instead to reframe the entire encounter, reminding audiences that the moment wasn't about personalities, it was about principles. When asked how she managed to stay so composed, she answered simply, "When you know the truth is on your side, you don't need to raise your voice." That sentence struck deeper than any headline. It distilled what people had felt watching her dismantle Jordan, that dignity speaks louder than arrogance, and clarity will always outlast chaos.